Welcome to The Debate. Today we're putting a specific piece of modern infrastructure on trial. We're looking at the way small businesses create video, and we're asking a pretty fundamental, maybe even uncomfortable question. Is the era of the rented soundstage, the big hollow room where you build everything from scratch, is it officially dead for the average business owner? We're diving into the rise of the Voxel Micro Video Lab.
And yeah, to be clear, we're not just talking about the size of the room here. We're debating a whole philosophy of production. It's the heavy, sort of cinematic way of doing things in a traditional studio rental versus this new micro methodology. And the core question is the friction of traditional production actually the thing that's killing your sales leads? Or, does this shift to micro just create a factory line culture that kind of strips the soul out of your content?
Exactly. And I'm taking the position that for the specific goal of lead generation, the traditional model is obsolete. I'm arguing that small and local businesses, they must adopt the Voxel Micro Video Lab model, this idea of a high-tech fast lane, because the friction of the old way is just too high to sustain a modern marketing strategy.
And I'm taking the skeptic's view here. I'm questioning whether this turnkey efficiency, this whole idea that you just walk in and push a button, if that compromises the artistic flexibility and, frankly, the authority that comes from a more traditional cinematic environment. My concern is that in our rush to remove all this friction, we're also removing the very thing that makes a brand memorable.
Okay, so let's get right into the biggest hurdle, right? The barrier to entry. Because I think this is where the traditional model it completely falls apart. If you look at the landscape for a small business owner, let's say a consultant or a realtor in the South Bay, their biggest problem isn't a lack of ideas. It's not that they don't know what to say. It is the sheer overwhelming friction of production. The source material calls the Voxel Lab a problem solver. And we really need to unpack what that means. We're talking about owners who just can't justify spending $10,000 on a camera rig they don't know how to use, and they certainly can't afford the hundreds of hours it takes to master lighting.
Yeah, look, I'll grant you that the learning curve for, high-end video is incredibly steep. I get it. If you hand a novice a cinema camera, they're probably going to get an out-of-focus mess. But is the solution to just capitulate and outsource your entire environment to some rigid system? You frame the Voxel model as a problem solver, but I'm worried it's actually more of a choice remover.
But that's exactly what an outsourced content department should do. It should remove the choices that don't drive revenue. Contrast the Voxel model with a traditional studio rental. When you rent a traditional studio, what are you actually paying for? You're buying a box. It's a dry hire. You get 4 walls, maybe a lighting grid if you're lucky, and a whole lot of silence. The burden of the creative architecture, the signal flow, mic placement, the entire workflow, that's all on you. You're literally paying for the privilege of doing all the heavy lifting yourself. A Voxel Lab is designed specifically for micro content, those high-impact short-form assets. It turns the user from a technician back into a business owner.
You call it a box, but I'd call it a blank canvas. And that distinction really matters. Traditional studios, as the text even notes, are built for movies. There's a certain psychology to that kind of space. When you walk into a soundstage that allows for real cinematic scope, where you can control the depth of field, where you can build a set that looks exactly like your brand and not, some generic podcaster's corner, you are communicating authority. My concern with this micro-footprint idea is that by shrinking the environment, you're also implicitly shrinking the perceived value of the brand. You're trading grandeur for convenience.
But I have to push back on that because you're conflating grandeur with effectiveness. In today's attention economy, especially on a phone, grandeur is often invisible. To win clients now, businesses need consistency. And consistency beats cinematic grandeur every single time if that big cinematic video only happens once a year because it was such a nightmare to produce. Voxel's workflow supports frequency. If a business owner has to rent a massive studio, hire a gaffer, hire a sound recordist, and then spend 4 hours lighting a set just to record 3 Instagram reels, they just won't do it. The math doesn't work. The Voxel model isn't shrinking value. It's operationalizing it.
Operationalizing. That's a very corporate word for what really should be a creative process. But okay, let's dig into the mechanics of this. The source says the Voxel environment has professional lighting and audio already dialed in. You see this as a feature because it saves time?
It is the primary feature. It's the difference between taking action and procrastinating for another 6 months.
But think about the limitation there. If the lights are dialed in, that just means they're, fixed? They're static, right? In a traditional studio, lighting is a language. I can make a scene moody, I can make it bright and poppy, I can use shadows to create drama. In a Voxel lab, I'm just walking into somebody else's lighting setup. The whole selling point is you can walk in, hit record, and walk out. But doesn't that imply that every video coming out of that lab looks exactly the same? Aren't we just creating a homogenized aesthetic for the sake of speed?
That's a risk only if you believe the lighting is the content. But let's be real about the market. The source material makes a really crucial point here. The era of the messy bedroom podcast is over. We're moving toward what it calls precision content engineering. The business owner doesn't need to spend 40 minutes debating if the key light should be at 45 degrees or 50 degrees. They need professional 4K content that's ready to go immediately. The dialed-in nature creates the visual punch of a TV set. I mean, when you watch the news, you don't complain that the lighting is the same every night. You trust the lighting so you can focus on the information. Voxel provides that standard.
Precision content engineering, it just sounds sterile. It sounds like we're manufacturing widgets, not connection.
It is manufacturing. It's manufacturing leads. I mean, think about the alternative. You rent a traditional studio for 4 hours. You get there. You spend the first hour just tweaking levels because there's some hum in the audio line. You spend the second hour realizing your memory cards aren't formatted right. You spend the third hour actually recording, but you're stressed because you're watching the clock tick down. In the Voxel model, all that friction is just deleted. The environment is sound treated, the look is professional 4K, and you're recording within minutes. For a local business owner, that efficiency is the difference between having a marketing channel and having a failed, expensive hobby.
Okay, I think you're maybe painting a worst-case scenario for traditional studios to bolster your point. Competent producers handle those things every day. But let's move to the second pillar of this Voxel argument, which is batch production. The source claims you can record a month's worth of content in a single afternoon. This is sold as like the ultimate benefit.
Because it is. It completely changes the economics of time for the business owner.
But does it destroy the biology of the performer? I mean, I really want to challenge the human element of batch production. If I force myself to record 20 separate videos in a 4-hour block, what happens to my energy by video 17? What happens to the nuance in my voice? Batch production assumes that human creativity can just be turned on like a faucet and left running. By the end of that session, am I really connecting with my audience, or am I just desperate to get through the checklist? A traditional studio, where maybe you take more time to reset between shots, it encourages a more thoughtful pace.
See, you're romanticizing the thoughtful pace, which in a business context usually just means inefficiency. The streamlined workflow of the Voxel Lab is the critical difference. Why do small businesses fail at video? It's not because they run out of energy on video number 15. It's because they can't sustain the schedule of setting up and tearing down all that gear every single week. That interruption, that is the killer.
So you're arguing the logistics are the primary failure point, not creative fatigue?
Absolutely, 100%. By compressing the timeline by using this high-tech fast lane, the business owner isolates all the creative work into one afternoon. If they can knock out their social strategy for the entire month in 4 hours, they have just freed up 29 other days to actually run their business. That is how you get leads. You don't get leads by spending 3 weeks editing a cinematic masterpiece that only gets 50 views because the algorithm buried it. You win by being present consistently. Voxel allows for those high-impact short-form videos that drive engagement now.
I accept that consistency feeds the algorithm, sure. But let's talk about the output itself. The source highlights micro turnaround and this concept of live to tape. For our listeners, this usually means switching camera angles in real time and recording a finished file, instead of shooting a bunch of raw footage and piecing it together later. So it implies minimal to no editing.
Correct. The goal is to have a finished asset the moment you hit stop.
And that just creates this high wire act that, frankly, terrifies me. The post-production process, the editing, that's the safety net. It's where you save a bad performance. It's where you tighten the pacing, you remove the ums and ahs, you fix the audio pop. If we're moving to a model where we just hit record and walk out, aren't we risking putting out content that's just riddled with mistakes? Traditional studios allow for extensive post-production because they know perfection doesn't happen in the room. It happens in the edit.
And that mindset, that we'll fix it in post mindset, is exactly what creates the bottleneck. The post-production bottleneck is where marketing campaigns go to die. We all know business owners with hard drives full of footage they shot 6 months ago and never released because they didn't have time to edit it. The Voxel environment is specifically designed to get rid of the need for heavy editing. It's sound-treated and intimate. It eliminates the echoes, the street noise, all the distractions that usually have to edit out.
Okay, but sound treatment doesn't fix a boring sentence. It doesn't fix a stutter.
No, but it shifts the expectations of the format. We're talking about the video first era, right? Specifically optimized for 9:16 vertical video and 16:9 horizontal for social media. These audiences demand authenticity and speed, not over-polished, sterilized perfection. A slight stumble makes you look real. The micro turnaround respects the business owner's time, and time spent editing is time not selling. If the lighting is perfect and the audio is crisp, which Voxel guarantees, the content is good enough to convert. You don't need a Hans Zimmer score. You just need clear audio and a clear value proposition.
Good enough to convert is a very utilitarian metric, but I suppose that's the nature of business. I do want to pivot, though, to the concept of the space itself. The term voxel.
It's a very distinct choice of words, yeah.
It kind of strikes me as a bit of marketing jargon. I mean, a voxel is a technical term from computer graphics, a volumetric pixel. It's a tiny three-dimensional cube. Are we just using fancy sci-fi words to describe what's basically a small closet with sound foam? Is this just rebranding a lack of space?
I think that's a cynical read. Look at the definition in the source. A voxel is a building block. The lab provides the foundational block for a digital presence. It's not just about size, it's about modularity. Think of it like a Lego brick for your marketing.
Okay, but how is it modular if, as we just discussed, everything is dialed in and fixed? Modularity usually implies I can move things around.
It's modular in how it fits into the business's life, not necessarily the physical arrangement of the room itself. Traditional studios sell square footage. You rent the floor. Voxel sells a modular filming environment designed for agility. The source specifically mentions the South Bay context, so local businesses. For a local realtor or a local consultant, having professional-grade media right there in their neighborhood without the massive overhead of maintaining their own studio, that's the building block they need. They don't need a warehouse. They need a cockpit.
A cockpit is a good analogy. Tight, functional, lots of switches. But a cockpit is also very cramping. The source mentions acoustic intimacy. That sounds lovely, but it also just sounds like small. My concern remains that some creators need room to breathe. They need to pace, they need to bring in props. The voxel model seems to dictate the content format. What if I want to do a demonstration with a physical product that's larger than a bread box? Does this micro footprint just fail me then?
It might, yeah, and I'll concede that point. If you're shooting a commercial for a new SUV, you do not go to a Voxel lab. You go to a soundstage with a cycle around the wall. But we are debating the needs of the modern small business owner who's looking for leads. And most of that content is talking head, interviews, and direct-to-camera value props. For that specific, very dominant use case, the micro footprint is superior because it focuses the energy. It creates that intimate, controlled environment that eliminates echoes and distractions. In a huge studio, the energy just dissipates into the rafters. In a voxel, it's all concentrated right on the lens.
I can see the argument for concentration. It's the difference between speaking to a stadium and speaking to a person across a table. The latter is certainly more persuasive for sales. And I suppose if we're strictly talking about micro-content for TikTok or Instagram, the cinematic background of a traditional studio often gets cropped out anyway. You pay for the wide shot, but you only ever publish the close-up.
Exactly. You're paying for 2,000 square feet of background that gets cropped into a tiny 9:16 vertical slice on an iPhone. That is economic inefficiency. It's waste. Voxel is optimized for the formats that actually dominate social media. It aligns the infrastructure with the output. You aren't paying for air you won't use.
That's a compelling point on the economics of the frame itself. If the final output is a vertical phone screen, the soundstage is irrelevant. But I still wonder about the cookie-cutter aspect. If every business in the South Bay uses the same Voxel Lab, won't every business in the South Bay start to look identical? Same lighting, same acoustic signature, same background color?
Does every news anchor look the same because they sit at a desk with good lighting? No. The differentiation is the personality. It's the content. The Voxel Lab ensures the technical quality is identical, which is to say high. It levels the playing field so that the best ideas win, not the person with the most expensive camera. It effectively democratizes high-end production with micro-scale hassle.
Democratizing high-end production is a noble goal. I just worry that when you remove all the hassle, you also remove the happy accidents that come from struggle. The friction of traditional production forces you to make choices. It forces you to prioritize. If it's too easy to record, do we just end up flooding the market with noise?
We're already flooded with noise. The difference is that most of it looks and sounds terrible because people are recording it in their kitchens with bad echo. Voxel ensures that if you are going to contribute to the conversation, you're doing it with professional 4K content. It respects the audience enough to give them a quality experience. And ultimately, for the business owner, that hassle isn't a creative constraint, it's a business killer. The Voxel model wins because it respects the business owner's most limited resource, time.
Time is certainly the currency here. And I will admit, looking at the demands of social algorithms, the traditional studio model, it feels like bringing a musket to a drone fight. It's elegant, it's historic, but it's just so slow.
It is using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. By removing the friction of setup and editing through turnkey and micro turnaround features, Voxel lets businesses actually compete. The argument stands. Stop doing video the hard way, which is the traditional studio route, and start building your lab. The Voxel model is just the logical infrastructure for this era of marketing.
You know, I will concede this. For micro content and consistency, the friction reduction of the Voxel model it's compelling. If the goal is purely sales leads through social media frequency, then yeah, the traditional studio is likely overkill and financially unsustainable for a small player. I admit that precision content engineering offers a valid alternative to the messy bedroom or the overpriced traditional studio. I still hold a candle for the bespoke, messy, creative potential of a large, empty room where you build a world from scratch. But I recognize that for a local business owner, building a world is less important than building a client list.
And that's the crux of it. We're seeing a shift where the definition of professional production has moved from movie scale to content agility. It's not about how big the lights are. It's about how fast you can turn them on.
Content agility. It is a brave new world. A faster one, certainly.
You have to ask yourself is your struggle with content creation a lack of ideas, or is it an infrastructure problem? Are you trying to film a movie when you should be building a lab?
And conversely, are you building a lab when maybe you should be painting a masterpiece? I think there's room for both, but knowing which lane you're in is likely the difference between silence and noise.
That's a wrap for this debate. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.